So basically, I'm here just to give a quick overview of online campus and how we are working with the school counselors at the base schools and the DSSs, and as well as how we move forward with working with students with IEPs. So I just wanted to come on and share that information with all of you. So a quick overview of the online campus. We deliver courses identical in content to those offered in the traditional classroom and use multimedia to engage students. Students are able to enroll up to 2 credits as part of their standard 7 high school credits without any fees or tuition. So students must register for the online campus courses through the base school counselor with the approval of the DSS. They have access to the registration form, the school counselors. It is on the website as well, and we made it digital this year for all the virtual reasons. So the school counselor is the one that would give the form to the student. All students must be available to attend weekly live online class sessions during the evening at fixed weekly date and times. And these classes are for 1 hour during the evening. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. Some considerations for students with IEPs. So the goals for this upcoming school year, and as we're moving forward in rolling enrollments, which I'll explain in a little bit, before sending a new registration, we would like the school counselor to connect with the case manager regarding the requested course or courses. And at that time, they would talk about the accommodations, classroom testing accommodations, and services with the student's IEP team that will be reviewed to ensure that the student will have equitable access to the online course. And if it's applicable, the IEP team will develop the plan for the student access to local support services and or amend the IEP as appropriate for compliance in an online environment. The counselor would send that support plan and or amended IEP to us. Some of the accommodations and services that are not readily accessible through online campus is access to classroom audio material. Access to this is provided in online courses when available, but some materials such as PDF files aren't always accessible. Braille, online campus, we do not have copies of course materials in Braille. And just as a reminder, we do not have SPED support, so dictation is on here in English to scribe. Some of the other accommodations that are not accessible are press of materials, read aloud, read on demand. So given the asynchronous aspect of the online learning environment, the online teacher will not be available to read directions, assignments, and assessments to the student. It will be asked that the base school provides this accommodation. Though a screen reader will read text within the online course, there may be sections within the course content the screen reader cannot access, for example, image files and online assessments. So this is one where you may get an email from me, the case manager, just to ensure that the student will have the access for this one. And for adapted PE, we do not have an APE teacher on staff. So the goals for online campus moving forward too would be for the school counselors and case managers to collaborate on how to provide for accommodations and services not readily accessible in the online learning environment prior to submitting an online campus registration form. So just as when the counselors are meeting with their students for academic advising and planning for the following year and planning appropriate courses, AP honors, and the all the different options they may have, we would like for the counselors to also talk to the case manager if a student is requesting an online course, just to ensure that they will have everything they need to be successful with online campus. If applicable, counselors will send the amended IEP to online campus along with the registration. And we will be happy to provide more guidance on accommodations and services not accessible in our courses to assist the local school IEP teams. We also hope that the case managers will include the online campus teachers in goal assessment and reporting. And we want to continue to build the relationships with the base schools and ensure that all students have equitable access to their online campus courses. And then the last slide is my contact information, email, and phone number. And you can reach out to me, or Ken's on here as well with any questions as we're moving forward with the next school year, or actually going through rolling enrollment, which starts today. So we may be still getting applications for students taking classes. Ken, is there anything you wanted to add?
Three things. One, thanks to all of you, and thanks to all of your teachers for all the work you guys do. But what Nicole said is really important for us. We don't have a special education person on staff during the school year. We do during the summer. And I would say most of our teachers do not hear from the case managers during the year. And so that worries me that the kids may not be getting the services they need. So if you can make sure that the case managers reach out. A couple years ago, I made sure that the counselors could see Student View, and Student View included the schedule, and I believe your case managers can do it. If they can't, I am happy to work with IT to see if we can change that, but at the very least, counselors can see the name of our teachers, so there is a way to get hold of them. And then the last thing is, are there questions? Nicole gave you guys a lot of information.
So this is Dawn Asenar. I've been monitoring the Padlet, and there were a few questions in there. If the team would like, I'd be happy to read them.
Please do, Dawn. You have time.
Oh, perfect. So the first one says, thanks for the presentation. I would like to follow up regarding 504 students. Messaging to special education leads should include that there are similar expectations for access when planning for those students.
And we are doing that, and we do have files for all those students, and they are receiving the services, as well as, for that matter, ESOL kids.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mention the 504s, but yes, thank you.
Perfect. The next one was an elective placement statement. Is there an elective placement statement that, like TSRC, if the proposal is for self-contained and the students request online campus? This seems like a mess.
We do not get many kids like that. We do get them from time to time, and obviously we have to work with the schools to carry that out. And it's a little difficult because all of our classes are done at night, as Nicole said, usually not before 5:30.
So I'm going to jump in. This is Debbie. So you're correct. There is not an elected. There's not like a drop-down statement. I think what they're talking about is on the IEP. There is in the present level of performance page a drop-down menu. I think that's what they were asking, and there isn't a pre-prescribed statement about online courses. So I think that's just something that you would indicate on the IEP is, that so-and-so is taking whatever the course is on the PAW page. If it's not outlined on their transition plan, which is another place that you could put if they're taking an online class.
Perfect. And Debbie, that leads us into the next question. Would the PLOP outline the requests by the family? When would the case manager be meeting the service hours if the student is not accessing courses?
So this is really similar. So if the student, it depends on the student. So in some cases, some students will take online and they may be doing something at school with it. And some students will be doing something, they'll be doing it at home, completing the coursework at home. So I think the case manager needs to check in during your, if you have advisory or your, whatever the block that you have, that may be a good time for the case manager to be checking in. But remember, it's just like when a student goes from team taught to, let's say they're going to take an AAP class, we still have to make sure that we're monitoring the students' IEP, their goals, and just checking in with them if they're doing an online class. Because do most of the students, is it part of their 7 periods, or is it an extra period that they're taking?
So first of all, there are very few students that we have who do not go into a school building. So most of our kids
That's what I thought.
Yeah, so there is a chance. I mean, it's obviously different this year, but in a normal year, there is any number of chances in a day that you can meet with the kids. A lot of we get kids because Half of our kids this year signed up before June. They just wanted to be in the online campus. Half of them have signed up in the last 2.5 weeks. And largely because of conflicts in the school that they couldn't get their schedule. We do have probably 300 kids who are taking an 8th class or an 8th credit, but they're still in the schools.
Dawn, is there any other questions, or was that the last one?
We just have 2 more questions that piggyback on each other. If there's time, I'd be happy to read those.
We still have a few minutes if you want to just.
Okay. So the first part of the question is, do we count service hours because it's an elective choice, but we're proposing, say, a small group? And then the piggyback to that question is, would we keep the IEP as if the student is remaining at the base school, but noting the online school, similar to TSRC?
So they're at their base school. Is this so? Based on this question, is the student? I would assume that the student is not full-time online. They're just doing. Are we talking online through Fairfax County or online through a different? Because if they're taking a course online, they're still a Fairfax County student. So we would propose our IEP as if the student were taking, as if what we believe the student requires, and then it's the student's choice. The parents are electing to take an online class. I'm just wondering if it's a full-time online that question is referring to, or a part-time online, just somebody taking a class.
Part-times, Shakita's saying.
Oh, part-time. Okay. So, go ahead, Ken. Did you want to say something?
No, you were doing great.
Oh, no. So we always will propose on our IEPs what we believe the student requires. So that it's the same thing if they're electively going to TSRC, and then they're choosing to attend an online course. So we can't allow for that to change the proposal that we're going to make. And then what you will be doing if they choose not to take the self-contained class, or they're going to take the online class, we just need to make sure that that teacher is monitoring and checking in with that student, and making sure and checking in with the online Nicole or somebody from their office, because if the student is really starting to have a lot of difficulty, we should be communicating and possibly going back to IEP and really talking about whether or not this is working or not. Of course, the parent and student have every right to continue with the online course, but we don't want to just forget to stop checking in on them. Maybe they need to stay after and work on some assignments, just like you would do if you were in a class and you wanted to stay after and get some support. There's a lot of different creative ways you could do it during that intervention block. Check in with them, see how they're doing. But if you have any questions, I would say reach out to your PSL if you have any concerns with somebody that's online, so we could try to troubleshoot with Nicole or with Ken before they get so far along in the course that it really becomes a problem for them getting a credit for the class. Anything else, Ken or Nicole, you want to add?
Well, that is why the case manager reaching out is so important, because we obviously don't know the case manager. And Nicole, if a kid doesn't do any work for a couple of weeks, Nicole will call the counselor.
Okay.
But we still won't know the case manager at that time. We also call home. The teacher will have called home, will have emailed. Grades go home every single week all year long.
Okay.
So we don't lose a lot of kids through the cracks, but we do have 1 out of every 5 kids in the online campus has an IEP, a 504, or is an EL kid. So, the misnomer that we don't have those kids is gone. It's not the way it is now. We look like Fairfax in every way. So the more you guys do, the more we appreciate it. And it's really a collaborative team effort. And we thank you so much for all the work you're doing for our combined students.
Thank you so much, Nicole and Ken, for being here this morning and answering questions. If we have any additional questions that come up, I'll let you know and I'll send them to you, and then we can get back to the team. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Okay, so we are going to move on to data collection, and we've got several folks. We've got Summer and I believe Jugnu are helping, and Courtney are helping with the next presentation. So is Jugnu and Courtney ready to go?
Yep, ready to go. Thank you.
Okay.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jugnu Agrawal, and I am an adapted curriculum specialist with Office of Special Education Instruction. I'm going to start us off by talking about how we can collect meaningful data through virtual learning, including both synchronous and asynchronous activities. So first, what I will ask you to do is to talk about some barriers to data collection in the virtual environment and conducting assessments. We will look at some creative ways to collect data during asynchronous learning and end with some additional resources and tools. So let's get started. So you will see in the chat box the link to Padlets. So take a couple of minutes and indicate some successes and some barriers you have experienced while collecting data throughout virtual learning. I see a lot of responses there. Give you another 30 seconds. Yep, you guys have identified several successes and several barriers. So thank you for filling that out. Hopefully, we will give you some additional ideas and resources throughout this quick presentation to help tackle those barriers. So why do we want to collect data? Next slide, please. So why do we want to collect data during asynchronous learning? Well, we are working on tracking progress of new skills or maintenance skills. And sometimes you may not have enough time to be able to collect all your data during synchronous learning. So this asynchronous becomes all the more important. What are we collecting data on? Next slide, please. Well, various targets. So we are collecting data on IEP goals and objectives, any instructional targets that you may be teaching to an individual learning that could correspond with pacing guides, and learning objectives within the evidence-based programs. We know this might be difficult depending on the profile of your learner, so let's take a look at some creative ways we can get some additional data. Some of these tools you see on this slide you may have already used for alternative assessments like VAP. Well, they can also be used to collect data on progress monitoring skills through virtual learning. You can have the student or caregiver take pictures or screenshots of the skill or the behavior. They can also record a video if it is a skill or behavior that lasts a period of time, like completing a work task or life skill such as making a bed. Or you can have them submit a permanent product, which may include forms or surveys within a Google Classroom, completing an activity, or also on the Boardmaker online. You might also have tools for collecting data within the Schoolology assessments, which is, I know, being piloted in some of the schools. And then also EBP's data collection tools available during asynchronous learning, which you have already kind of must have heard from your adapted curriculum team member. So now the next question comes, when do we set up these asynchronous learning activities? They can be set up on Mondays. You can also set up outside of the designated synchronous sessions. And hopefully these will help you transition back to brick and mortar buildings. And then even during transitioning, the students can continue to work on these skills during the asynchronous learning. I'm going to pass it over to Summer now.
Hi, everyone. So as Jugnu mentioned, there are several ways to collect data asynchronously, and now we're going to share some ideas for collecting data synchronously. So as Jugnu already mentioned, why would we collect synchronous, or why would we want to collect data synchronously? And ultimately, we know that we are charged with tracking progress on new skills that students have, their maintenance of skills. We know that it's important to have baseline data as it relates to informing IEP goals and objectives. So ultimately, that's our why we would want to collect data in our synchronous learning environment. So what are we collecting data on? So we might have informal assessments or measures that we would use, progress monitoring tools as it relates to targeted skills, and of course, our IEP goals and objectives are what we would want to be collecting that data for. So how are we going to collect that data? So when thinking about synchronous data collection, we're thinking about the fact that it's a great opportunity for you to connect with your students or for your teachers to connect with their students in that synchronous environment. And so thinking about it almost like a continuum of if a teacher can work in an individualized environment synchronously and do a cold probe or collect some informal assessment data that way, that would be a great way to collect some synchronous data. An IA could also collect that information if an IA has been trained in either an assessment or an evidence-based program, and maybe there's a probe to go along with that. And then ultimately kind of ticking up that continuum and thinking about, so if the teacher could collect data individually, then maybe in a small group during small group instruction, either the teacher or an IA could be monitoring the student and collecting data that way, and then ultimately even in a whole class setting through a variety of ways, pictures and samples, permanent products that the student might be producing during the class time, whether that be through like a form or a survey. I know a lot of teachers are using Kahoot, so that might be a way to look at how the student is performing. The exit tickets are another great way synchronously to kind of monitor students' progress and look at that information. Some other things that we brainstormed might also be like a whiteboard or a self-assessment. So there's a lot of different ways that teachers could utilize that synchronous time, either again individually in small group or whole group, in order to collect some data from students. We also had some information to share with you about the criterion reference Brigance that can also be administered virtually and is required for all students assessing the adapted curriculum both fall and spring. And there are specific subtests that are available on distance learning, the Distance Learning 24/7 site in the assessment subfolder in the adapted curriculum folder. And a training for Brigance and other informal assessments is also available on the adapted curriculum Google Classroom. And we're going to share a little bit more as well as some additional resources for you here in a second. Next slide. Oh, to the when. So when would we collect this synchronous data? So I know there are intervention times that are built into all of your secondary schedules. that might be a time that you might meet with a student or a small group in order to collect this information, as well as scheduling times with the family, arranging a mutually convenient time for a teacher, conference check-in, and then thinking about as you're collecting that data, and we're going to show you some sample tools for data collection in a minute, but ultimately using those tools in a way that when students do transition back to brick and mortar, that we can kind of have a seamless transition of the data collection process. And so we're going to show some examples of how to support your teachers with that transition of the data collection process here in a second as well. So on the screen are two different sample data binders. On the left, you see a copy, or you see a picture of an actual data binder that was developed for students that are more common in the Cat A program. And you see you would have your IEP, your progress reports, and then tabs for each of their IEP goals with a data sheet for each goal, and then the opportunity to put data samples or copies of the data samples behind each IEP goal. You might also have an FBA or a BIP, and that would go in that hard data binder. On the right, you see, excuse me, a table of contents for another data binder. This is one out of the EBA office, and it just shows again the different sections that you might put in a traditional data binder and what information you would want to have in that data binder as it relates to monitoring that student's progress and keeping all of that information in one place. We put an example over on the left of the slide of two electronic data binders. So I know for many of us, I like things paper, but at home in this virtual environment, it's hard to do everything on paper just because we're at home. And so one of the things that I've started doing, and we have a couple different options as far as you could use your desktop, you could use your H drive, your school team drive. I also have just that flash or that external drive that I can save student information on. So these are student folders, and then in the virtual folder or your electronic folder, you might have, again, that PDF of the IEP, PDFs of their progress reports. If they went to ESY, maybe you have their ESY progress report and their ESY data sheet. Then you might also have, it'd be a nice place to warehouse your data sheets, and as you're collecting evidence of data throughout the virtual learning environment, you could be putting that in each student's folder electronically. So you might have pictures, you might have, again, just as different samples of student work that you can put in an electronic folder as opposed to a binder that we might use when we're back in brick and mortar. And then I just have one more slide that shows an example of a data sheet again. This is for a student's writing goal, and you see just the data as it relates to monitoring progress towards that goal, and then where you might put the work samples.
Good morning, everybody. Now that we have been able to put some focus on the why, what, how, and when for synchronous and asynchronous data collection, we wanted to direct you to some additional tools available to collect that data. So after you've made your plan on the type of data you'll be collecting and whether it's an asynchronous or synchronous, we have some resources for you. So just wanted to point out the Special Education Instruction Resource Hub. So if we could click that. All right, so here you have a variety of resources. You've probably seen this, so we invite you to explore it further. But right tucked away in the top there on the right, there is a data collection link. So here you're going to see all the various departments are represented and a large variety of data sheets. So if you click the down arrow for each of the departments, So under early childhood, say, yep, adapted curriculum. You'll see that there are a variety of sheets there for you. And unless you've received specific guidance to use a particular data sheet or a particular department sheets, please feel free to look through the various options to find what fits the needs of your data collecting. So I did want to point out, though, that there are some how-to documents at the bottom. So if you take a look, we could even click on the frequency link, how-to frequency. Yep. So each of the types of data collection has a how-to guide on how to collect that data, in addition to all of the data sheets that are available from each of the departments. So this would be a great resource to be able to direct your teachers to. And you'll see that there are several options: momentary time sampling, duration. So lastly, if we go back to our presentation, we have a link to the progress monitoring guidance document. It begins with the factors to consider with virtual assessments, including group size, materials access, etc. And then the document further breaks down progress monitoring tools for literacy and math. So we invite you to take a look at those, and then it ends with the contact information for high incidence general curriculum staff. So we invite you to continue to add your successes and challenges to the Padlet. And that ends our presentation.
Thank you guys so much. Dawn, we have a little bit of time. Do we have any questions for that group?
Jennifer was going to help us with reading the questions. I didn't know if she wanted to jump in. We were tag teaming this.
Good morning, Debbie. Yes, we do have some questions. So one of the first question that came in was, and I think this has probably been addressed, but maybe the person who typed the question could jump in if they feel it hasn't been addressed. How do we collect data if students are unable to attend synchronous sessions due to lack of availability for caregiver or parent to help students log into class? I do think that we did cover some of this, but I don't know if the poster feels like they'd like a little more information or clarity on that. Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. How do we know that the asynchronous materials were completed independently? If parents are doing this for their students, I worry about the fidelity of this data.
Who wants to jump in from the group to answer this one?
I can take this, and then the group can add in. Hi, everyone. This is Ellie Stack. And this is actually one of the topics I was going to be mentioning later on. As you all are having conversations with your parents, one of the things that I think I've heard enough that would be good for you to bring up with them is the importance for them having their student do the work on their own. And also to help the parents understand the type of prompts or support that their students need. So this is a very unique situation that we're in, where parents are more involved with the education, the daytime education. than they have been in the past. Of course, in the past, we've always had this concern with homework. But one thing that I think parents are struggling with is they are seeing their child either get things wrong, or they're prompting their child to the answer before their child maybe needs the prompt. And I think it's going to be part of our job as educators to help the parents understand the importance of our students, of the work showing the students' true abilities, because that's how we are going to be adjusting how we're teaching. And in some cases, I think the parents just need to hear that and understand that. And by letting them know that they play a key part in the education, but we do need the students' true and accurate work. And then from that point, when it comes to the asynchronous, we are going to have to take the parents, or student as they submit their work, in the fact that they did it independently. There is the honor code for students, but of course we know that parents sometimes do provide that extra support than what our students need. But that is something to take to keep in mind, is just having that conversation to raise the awareness of parents. And then also for parents in using some of the methods that were outlined for the asynchronous, and I'll go back to that slide. If we're taking pictures of the student work, or even the videos, I love that video idea. Though as a parent, the idea of taking videos, it's a lot of work, but it's a great way because those videos will capture it. So that's just an idea with that. But part of it is going to have to be making sure parents understand the purpose of this, and then we are going to have to be taking some of them at their word. Courtney.
Yes, just to add, thank you, Ellie, for jumping in and adding that information. Just to add off of that too, something to keep in mind is that you will want to still measure this goal once you do get back to face-to-face, just because you were working on it and collecting the data asynchronously. So it's not something that I would just necessarily just drop off, even if you feel like the data says it's mastered. I would check on it once you do get back to face-to-face. And you could also add in for progress reports and so forth that the data was collected asynchronously as well, just so that you have that reflected.
I really appreciate that. That was a good point. You're right. When it comes to the mastery of a goal, we want to be careful on that. And your point about the progress report, so important.
So we may have we may have time for one more question, and then we can get back to questions at the end. Again, Jennifer and Dawn, if you keep tabs of those, then we can come back to them.
Sure. Someone had asked about access to the adapted curriculum Google Classroom, and I've added that data into the Padlet. But one question it looks like someone is asking that we may have time to address quickly is, can you speak more to the expectations or administration of Brigance?
Yeah, I can take that. So this is Jugnu. Hi. So for the Brigance, basically for the criterion referenced Brigance, we have more flexibility in being able to implement that. And the company has been really gracious in giving us access to some of those subtests in the PDF format. So those are all available up there. And I have already been speaking with a lot of teachers who have been pulling their students out, like when we talked about when can this administration be done. So that's information. There are a lot of subtests on there, so please use those for progress monitoring and those kind of things. And those are also helpful tools for you to kind of collect data on some of those IEP goals that might be in there. So hopefully that answers your question about the Brigance.
Thank you, everyone.
And so at the start of the year, even though we are virtual, we still have the obligation to be doing progress monitoring on our students. And that includes a beginning of the year assessment. And right now, I do believe for our kids, it's even more important than ever because of the education they've received since March. just to get a feel for where our students are. And so giving the Brigance and the other assessments that are included on that progress monitoring and the virtual environment document is so important now, as it is every year, but it is important. But as Jugnu said, when you check out that Brigance document, you are going to see that there's a lot more flexibility with the Brigance than we might have expected to allow us to do it virtually.
Thank you, Ellie. So Ellie, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can begin the next activity, which is sharing successes.
All right, well, fabulous. That brings it to sharing successes. As you all know, I don't need to tell you all, so much has changed this school year. The what of the work that we do, the what we're doing hasn't changed. There's been some additions to the what that we're doing, but the main purpose of our jobs is still the same. What has changed tremendously, though, is how we are providing that work or support to our students and to our school teams. And so we want to take time today to do an activity to allow you all to share the successes that you've seen. So each one of you all have had to find new ways to do all of the important work that needs to be done. So we're going to take time the next few minutes to do an activity, and picture us, over at Willow Oak sitting at our small group tables. We're going to break you up into tables. And what we would like for you to do, well, first, and this activity, the directions for the activity are included on your guided notes page for today. So the first thing that you're going to do is put your name on the slide and put your school. And then you're also going to introduce yourselves. And on the guided notes page, it does include some guidance for introducing yourself, your name, your school, your role at the school, and how long you've been there. And then I would love for you to include an adjective that describes how you're feeling today, the first day of the third week of school, with how things are going. So you're going to introduce yourself. After you introduce yourself, and also you need to pick a timekeeper and somebody to keep an eye on the chat window, because I will be putting different prompts or support in through the chat window. And then after you do that first slide, you're going to go to the next slide. And as you can see on this slide, there are a couple categories. And so I want you to think of the strategies that you've come up with for relationship building or collaboration at your school building, communication, scheduling, and then of course there's the other category. So think about the strategies that you've either used or you've implemented at your school that have been successful, and you're going to list the strategy here. And so everybody's going to take a turn listing their strategy, and it's a lot like the jot thoughts activity that you'll be doing at the table with Post-it notes. But instead of writing it on a Post-it note and saying it out loud, you will say it out loud as you type it on the chart. So for example, I put on here, one relationship building is to make sure we're using cameras as we're meeting with people. And so we're going to take time, I believe I put 6 minutes, for you to, everybody who's in your group, to have a turn adding their successes. And you can add as many as you can during that time period, but you're adding one for each turn and you're taking turns. Just put it in the column or the category that it applies to. Does it deal with relationship building or collaboration? Does it deal with communication or scheduling? Or does it not deal with one of those? It goes in the other category. All right, so you're going to take the time for that. Then you're going to look at the ideas that people have added, and you're going to add your initials to the votes column. You're going to add your initials to, I believe I said, 4 topics that you want to hear more about. And then after everybody adds their initials, you're going to see which topics have the most votes. And then we're going to take time. The third segment of time is for whoever wrote this idea down, the one that got the most votes. That person is going to share more details about what they wrote. And when they are done sharing, we'll come up to these ones, which also have the most votes, and we're going to share out about those strategies. At the end of this, you will have learned from your colleagues about some strategies that have worked at their school. And we're hoping this is going to help everybody, because we don't need to reinvent the wheel. If somebody's trying something at their school and it worked, it might be worth trying at my school rather than me trying to figure out how I can do it my own way. And if you have time after this, the last question that's on your notes page is for you to talk about how you're going to share the information that you got at today's meeting with your special ed team, because it's a little different than like in normal times. So I am going to post the link to this activity in the chat window in a minute. But first, I'm going to see, are there questions about the activity before I send you to your breakout rooms?
I think there was one, Ellie, that I see so far, and it was where do we find this?
Yeah,
I think we're answering that.
I'm going to share the link with you now. Let's see. I'm going to copy the link to share with you, and then I'm going to put you in random breakout rooms. All right. So there's the link to the activity. There is a set of slides for each group, and the group is by your room number. All right, so if you're put into group number 16, you're going to scroll down until you find room number 16. Okay, so with that, I am coming to the breakout rooms section of my screen, and I am going to put you all into breakout rooms. Let me set it up. Hold on, it's not responding to me. Here we go. Now it's responding. I'm going to send you to the groups, and we need, sorry, my mouse is doing funny things. I'm going to randomly assign you, and here we go.
Hey, Ellie, are we going to bring folks back in a minute? Oh, okay.
be getting missed, you know. But thank you guys. All righty. Well, welcome back to the main room, everybody. I really appreciated your involvement in that activity, and I loved looking through the slides. You all, each of the slides, it's funny, has a little bit of different twist to them. The one slide I was looking at here, in the other column, they talked a lot about the support for the paraprofessionals. In another slide, I saw how office hours to have staff come and talk to you all was really helpful. So I, of course, was not able to hear the details or the conversations in all 20 rooms, but I was able to see what you wrote. And that is why I'm asking for you, if you have not already added your slide or your name to the white slide that went with your group activity, if you could add your name to the white slide, that way, if I'm looking at group number 8's color slide and I see an idea here that I want more information on, I have the ability, and you have the ability, to then go back to the slide that has their names and email the group and say, hey, who had this idea? I would love to hear more. So not only can you learn from your group and what you all talked about, but then you can also learn from other groups. So thank you so much for your participation in that. I don't know what happened. I know a few of the slides got deleted about halfway through, so I don't know what happened there, but I appreciated how the groups were able to reconnect or recreate the slide and then quickly got back to speed. So thank you all for that. We are going to switch to, I'm trying to navigate my screen while I talk, and let's see, we are going to come over here to the primary case managers and Debbie.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Ellie. Great activity. So sorry, my video hasn't been working. I tend to have video problems with Blackboard, but I'm just going to take a few minutes, just nothing really quick. I just wanted to remind everybody, I know that, thank you all so much as you've been updating your PCM. Really important for us to have this tab. We are using it more than ever. I know DSS, Tina and Ellie, we've been using this as we are doing staffing meetings. When we're in the staffing meetings, it has been a great tool to be able to pull up your schools and be able to categorize students as we get questions or we get requests. And I know you've heard a little bit of rumblings about the cohorts, maybe by your principals, that may be starting to come in the we don't have an actual start time, but I'm sure your principals have been letting you know a little bit about it, and they're going to probably talk about it a little bit about that tomorrow at the school board meeting. But as we're building cohorts, we've been going in and taking a look at, like, for example, like what students are in the CSS. And what, and that has helped me and Tina and enhanced thought and Ellie to get IDS numbers, and not just having to use just validation. So the more that you can go in and update it and make any changes as things change, the more we really, really appreciate that. That's all I had to say for PCM. So we have Janelle Ellis, who is going to talk to us about CTS.
Sorry, Mr. Murphy.
I can't do anymore, but he just.
Hi
Okay,
there.
thank you for what you did. That's a lot more than I could do.
If you want to go to the next slide. So this is Janelle Ellis with Career and Transition Services, and I just have a few items to share with you. The career portfolio, which is that white folder usually kept in each student's special services file, or sometimes with the ETR, depending on the school, is transitioning to an electronic format. So the career portfolio is the folder that's used to store all of the student documentation related to transition planning. And it's just a really good way to ensure that there's continuity with planning from year to year, and it helps to develop the transition plan too every year. So we have created a CTS folder for all middle and high school students within Naviance. And in your notes for this meeting, there's a link
with a 2-minute video that just shows you how to access the folder and how to upload to the folder. ETRs have counselor level access to Naviance and can upload to this folder, but so can teachers and case managers who have access to Naviance for their students. So as a reminder, the types of documents that should be in the folder is anything related to the career skills documentation for the student. So like certificates, maybe from CTE course, community work experience summaries that are completed for all students that participate in that, job coach reports, employer evaluations from community work experiences, and also a lot of other things too. So the video kind of outlines, the short video will tell you more about what goes in the career portfolio. So there's no expectation that the contents of each student's hard copy folio or folder will be uploaded to the new space. So nobody has to worry about that. But just going forward, documents should be uploaded. And middle schools will not receive the white career portfolios in the Pony this year. The expectation being that transition assessments and such will be uploaded into Naviance instead in the CTS folder. Central Office has identified one of our resource teachers as the primary contact from Central Office for middle school transition support. So Maggie Contreras is our job coach supervisor and is also kind of the liaison for middle school transition support. Her contact information is also listed in your notes from this meeting, and she's available to answer questions, both staff and parent questions. And to provide training to middle school SPED staff around effective transition planning. She can also, liaison with the ETRs and arrange training for special education staff. It's just really important for all special education staff to understand why transition services are part of the IEP process at age 14 or 8th grade. Maggie's a good resource to help build this capacity among the middle school teachers so that they can share transition information with parents when they're asked. We will not be having students participate in community-based work experiences while the division is engaged in the 100% virtual instruction. So last year we had over 1,000 students participating in community work with close to almost 400 different employers in the area. So as you can imagine, it's not a simple task to bring this back to that level immediately, but we are working with employers, we're maintaining contact with them, we're surveying interests, and we will most likely need to reestablish and establish some new partners when we're able to resume this important aspect of our career development electives. I also encourage you to take time to visit the CTS Resource and Curriculum Hub. The link is provided in your notes, and this hub is also linked through the ISD Curriculum Hub and also through the Special Services Curriculum Hub, which was shown earlier with the data collection. And in your notes, there's a link to guidance around ETR services for alternative programs. And this link includes a list of which of the 2 ETRs are aligned with all of the alternative programs. So students who are placed through a hearings office are entitled to ETR services in their IEP, while students who are electively placed in the alternative programs may have consult ETR services. The base schools are responsible for completing the IEPs for students that are assigned to to interagency services sites, but the ETRs listed there can definitely help you with transition planning and do that. So there's also a link to the 3-tiered service approach to ETR services in your notes, and this is a helpful guide for determining how and when ETR services are accessed in all schools for students with IEPs. The next slide. So CTS, every year we provide data at this meeting on the results of Indicator 13 and 14, and Indicator 13 requires compliance around effective transition plans, IEPs, and Indicator 14 looks at student level of engagement 1 year after exit, within that year after exit. So this slide right here shows the results of indicator 13 for 2019 and 20 school year. Let me see where I am here. So most IEPs that were not held within the annual date were to be held during March when the schools abruptly closed due to the pandemic. And it's important to know, and I also wanted to state that it's been steadily improving every year. So this 3% of transition IEPs that required, okay, I'm getting mixed up here with the annual date and the post-secondary goals. So the first 3% of that transition IEPs reviewed required addendums to improve the post-secondary goals, but this is half of what it was, cut in half from last year, and there's been steadily improvement in this every year. So the IEPs also that were not held, 4% were not held within that annual date, but 80% of those were during the closures, as I said, the abrupt closures. And again, this is dropping every year as well. Okay, the next slide. This is indicator 14. This slide shows where FCPS is in relation to state targets for the number of students involved in higher education, competitive employment, or some other type of training post-secondary, or some other type of employment such as military or sheltered employment, supported employment. Note that the FCPS met and exceeded the state targets. Our response rate was high again this year due to a very tenacious and concerted effort to reach students and families. So we had 997 families or students that we actually had contact with this year out of about 1,800. So there's a more detailed data breakdown that will be available soon, such as like the post-secondary engagement by disability, involvement, the student involvement in IEPs, high school satisfaction, and some more details about the students that are unengaged. And that's coming. And then lastly, the last slide, I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of our upcoming events so that you can help spread the word. There's 2 coming up soon. This fall, and the first is the Community Resource Fair, Moving On to Life in the Community. That's held every fall. It usually takes place at Lake Braddock High School. But this year we're holding it virtually. This event is really important for students and for families who may need ongoing support once they leave FCPS. Those kind of supports might include like residential, ongoing employment support services, recreation, Social Security, things like that. So the flyer link for this event is in your notes also, and it's also on the Parent Resource Center webpage. And then a new event that we have this year that we're excited about is the Post-Secondary Education Boot Camp for students with disabilities. And this will be a 2.5-hour workshop virtually where students will learn how to conduct college searches, complete the Common Apt, understand disability support services better and how to go about getting them, and then just receive some like scaffolding and executive function support for the steps in the process going forward. So in coming years, we'll work to hold this event earlier in the fall, but with the way that this fall's been, November 9th was the earliest that we could do this this year. Especially being it's the first one that we've done. So please share with teachers and any seniors. This will be for seniors who are planning to attend college and can benefit from this extra support. The calendar of CTS events offered throughout the year is linked in the notes. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Janelle. So we're going to take a break at this time. Let's come back at exactly 10. And then we'll get moving, and I will talk to you a little bit about recovery services. Okay, I hope everyone had a chance to take a break and is back. Got some coffee, got some water, and just stretch your legs. Okay, so Angelina and I are going to briefly cover. That's right, there's no lines at the bathroom, Ellie, you're correct. Angelina and I are going to review recovery services with you. We are going to just highlight some of the key points. There is going to be a presentation and a training that we will do. Christina, do you have your hand up?
We just wanted to start with a couple of questions from the Padlet for CTS first.
Okay, go ahead. Go right ahead.
Hi, thank you so much. We had some really good questions. And the first one we wanted to know about is, will students who are 100% virtual have an opportunity for community-based work experience?
Is this after, at a point, are you talking about students who are electing to remain virtual the entire year, even after some groups come back?
Correct.
Right. That's a good question, and that would most likely, I think, be up to the family, and we are working with risk management too, as far as our work community work experience agreements and parent permission forms and things like that are in process for this new environment. So if a student chooses to be 100% virtual, I'm not sure they would elect to go to a work site, and then we have to look at our staffing as well. With our job coaches and with our just the way that all of that falls out too, so that we have the adequate staff coverage at the work sites for students. So it's just kind of it's another one of those questions that there's not a clear black and white answer for.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Another question we had was, who completes the Naviance?
Naviance is the holds the academic and career plan for each student. So the school counseling department, it's my understanding, is kind of the lead folks. All the school counselors have 100% access to Naviance and all the components of it. ETRs have similar access with a few things that they don't, maybe a couple things that they don't have access to, that they don't need to, but they have broad access to it. And then teachers have a level of access as well for students to work with the curriculum that's in there for career and college readiness, and also to work with the student on their academic and career plan. So Naviance is something that's a district-wide, school-wide. Everybody should be trying to use this, and it's being encouraged more and more to use it. As far as the career portfolio that we're moving into Naviance, it will be I think the 2-minute video helps to explain that a little bit better, because it shows the different places that you can go in Naviance for different things. But that should help explain a little bit more about that CTS folder and how to get to it. Teachers should have access to that folder as well if they have access to that student's material.
Thank you so much. And I imagine that the video will help answer the next two questions. And that would be, what will 8th grade case managers be responsible for in Naviance? Previously, they started the folder. And then the next, I'll let you answer that one.
Okay. Yeah, the case managers would want to ensure that any transition assessment that's done, like an interest inventory, say, or something like that, there will be less that goes into the career portfolio or the Naviance folder in middle school, because it grows and grows as the student progresses into high school. But and Maggie Contreras, who's the central office middle school support person, can help any of the staff that has questions about how to upload anything or what should be uploaded. But yeah, the video does help to clarify what goes in.
Perfect. And then the next one was, how much turnaround training will be needed for department chairs to ensure that case managers can navigate Naviance?
Naviance has a lot of good already training built in. So it's just a matter of going in there and doing kind of the orientation that they have and the training they have for Naviance. It's not a difficult program to use, and there's a lot of already existing training and orientation for it for staff. And now the login is the same as it is for your for your regular login that you get in for everything for the county is also now what you can get into Naviance with. It used to have a separate login, but now it's the same as your FCPS login for everything else. So that makes it easier as well. And the training, it shows in the video how to access the Naviance. Let me see if you're on the intranet site, you will see a bar for it. Let me see. On the intranet site, you should be able to see the Naviance tab, and everything that you need to see to get into it should be right there. So if you go to account sign on the intranet page and you scroll down, you'll see Naviance, and that's where you can access information on it.
Thank you so much for all that good information you provided us.
Yep. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Okay, so we're going to get started. So today I'm going to spend some time with Angelina talking to you about recovery services and the IEP. We have drafted a document and have asked several groups to review and provide input on this document. The information from this document was adapted from the VDOE considerations for COVID recovery services for students with disabilities. You may have seen this document or provided the link a couple of weeks ago. What this document is going to include, it's going to give you information about the definition of recovery services. It's going to have a chart that'll direct you to the data sources to use when making IEP decisions. It's going to give you some FAQs to apply to recovery services, a sample PWN, a flow chart that takes you through different options and guides the IEP team. And then there's a Venn diagram that's going to compare the differences between recovery and compensatory services. The link to the VDOE document is included in the notes that Ellie has provided you with the link to. And on Friday, I met with about 4 principals and Angelina, and they kind of went through the document with us and gave us some input that we'll be incorporating. Once the document is finalized, what we will do is we will do a recorded training like we did with the IEP guidance document so that you can share it with your teachers and use it at CLTs and go through it slide by slide and go through the pages of it. So I'm just going to highlight, the two of us are just going to highlight some information that's pertaining to recovery services that will help you as you begin those conversations with your school teams. And then the next couple of slides, we'll link into a little bit of the information that we talked about just earlier about data collection and how you can use the data collection that they spoke about to make decisions about recovery services when you're meeting with families. So as you can see in this slide, what is recovery services? So when you look at recovery services, you're thinking about that additional services and supports to regain lost educational skills. Despite the development of TLPs to ensure the continuity, I'm like tongue-tied today, of learning due to COVID-19 school closure, many students are likely to show signs of regression or display gaps in their learning when schools have reopened. In order to mitigate this regression and close these gaps, we may find that many students with disabilities may need some type of recovery service. This means that COVID recovery services may need to be considered for any student. However, we need to remember that does not mean that every student with a disability will require recovery services. Okay, Christine, you can go to the next slide, or Ellie. Okay. As we continue to talk about recovery services and whether or not it is needed, we will continue to refer to the importance of data. The data and its analysis will be used by IEP teams to determine whether or not a student requires recovery services. We need to remember that prior to determining the need for an amount of COVID recovery services, each IEP team should consider data from a variety of sources. So that's what Angelina is going to talk about. What are the variety of sources and what time frames do we need to look at? So we're going to be looking at data spanning from the continuum of pre-COVID, prior to the March closing, to the return to school. Therefore, IEP teams should use individual student progress data and data about FCPS offerings. So what do we offer during the school closure? The need for covert services should be based on whether or not the student continued making progress in the general education curriculum or alternative courses of study specified in their IEP or toward meeting their individualized IEP goals, and or if any significant regression occurred during the period of school closure. Again, we need to remember that not all students, and we'll probably say this a couple of times, with disabilities will need COVID recovery services. It's really going to depend on what the data is showing us. The IEP team will need to determine if and any the amount and the type of recovery services required to address those individual students' needs. Then they will be documented in the proposal of the IEP. And the information on where and how to document the services on the IEP, we're still in discussion of how that's going to look. Will we be documenting it on the plop, on the services page? We're in discussion with Jane and our team at DP&E as to what's the best way to document these services. So I'm going to turn the next couple of slides over to Angelina, and Angelina is going to talk to you about the different time frames and the data that you will be using when you're considering whether or not we require recovery services. So Angelina.
Thanks, Debbie. Good morning, everybody. So as we think about, as Debbie said, we're looking at the continuum of the time frame. So there's pre-COVID, so that would be last August through March, and then the COVID closure, which would have been March through June, and then certainly our return to school, which is now moving forward. So we really need to make sure that we're comparing that data from these timeframes, and we're going to start with that earlier pre-COVID data. So as we begin gathering and thinking about the data, both formal and informal, we want to establish that baseline so that we can compare the skills and the performance toward the IEP goals, review any of the progress that was made on those IEP goals to include those objectives and any other benchmarks. We want to look at observations and data from teachers, therapists, parents, and anybody else who may have had direct contact with the student, whether through a screening, assessment, or any other information that may have been obtained on that student. We want to make sure that we're looking to include any sort of pre-test and post-test data, sorry, a lot of STs in there, that may come out of a curriculum-based assessment, for example. There may be other relevant factors to consider as we're looking at this data. So as you can see here, we provided you with some examples that could include Iep Progress Reporting, the data that's coming from parents, related service providers, teachers, private evaluations that parents may have shared with us, or if we were able to get some done. Some of our students got assessments during the summer. Maybe we have access to that. As I said earlier, any of those pre-post curriculum-based measurements, certainly grades and any report cards leading up to that pre-COVID timeframe can factor in as well. So we also want to think about some questions. We're going to walk you through some of these questions to look at each time frame, the pre-COVID, the actual closure, and the return to school, to help guide your school team discussions regarding the student's data. So we want to think about as a team, did the student make progress on her IEP goals and objectives prior to the school building closure that was ordered by Governor Northam? What was the student's baseline? Right? Where did his or her IEP goals sit, objectives prior to this closing? What was their progress at that time? So we may not have completed those progress reports during fourth quarter, and even third quarter, we may have had minimal information just based on each person's access to the data they may or may not have had at the time that third quarter progress reports were completed. But we certainly use whatever information we have as we're having these conversations around the student's progress prior to COVID-19. And as we think about the closure then, we want to start to prepare ourselves. Do we have the documentation of the progress the student made during the ordered school building closure in the form of progress reports or any other documentation or data that we might have? Again, we know you may not have all this data. You may not have been able to collect data on the fourth quarter progress reports or even have been able to report, on the data from the third quarter progress reports. But we may have some grades. We may have other data sources. We do know that we had asked everyone to do the best they could to collect the progress monitoring data on that student's participation, assuming they participated during distance learning during the closure period. So this data is going to be similar to the type of data we looked at for pre-COVID, except for ESY. Students may have participated in ESY, and therefore that would be an additional data source that we may have on students. So if the student did attend ESY, you're going to want to make sure that we're reviewing the progress reports from ESY and any of the data or other work samples we may have been able to get from ESY. We may have students, of course, that are transitioning and leaving you either from elementary to middle or middle to high, which may add another layer of challenge. We do understand that. So you're not going to be as familiar with that student and or his or her data from the previous year. So in those cases, we encourage you to reach out to the previous school, previous teachers, and get some information from them, if at all possible, prior to any staffings, so that you can get together and clarify, and any of the data that you do have, get any questions answered prior to going into a meeting, so that you can take into account all of this information. Of course, we never want to forget. We want to make sure we're including and taking into account what our parents are sharing with us regarding the distance learning experience for their children as they process through all of that. So as you now come to that point where you think about that school closure period, some guiding questions to consider are: what were the goals and accommodations and services that we were able to offer the student through our temporary learning plans, or our TLPs? Was the student able to engage? And did we see any progress or regression in the educational opportunities that offered by FCPS and provided by us? And were special education services and supports that were offered, did the student access them? Based on what was offered during the closure, were they reasonable in light of the student's circumstances, as well as the circumstances themselves? So as we look at bullets 2 and 3, the engagement in the process and the progress in those opportunities that we offered, and then in light of the circumstances, if those services were reasonable, that information is going to go into much more detail in our guidance recovery document for you, but just wanted to really make sure you understand the critical nature of looking at these two areas when we're talking about whether or not a student made progress and why or why not. We want to consider the educational model that we offer school division to all of our students, and was the student able to take advantage of it? Did the student take advantage of this opportunity or not? Did the parents refuse to send their child? Was the student accessible for us to provide those services? And if he or she was, how much of that time did they avail themselves? Was core content instruction and specialized instruction actually delivered to the students? And of course, how was the student's performance during the closure? We're going to want to make sure we're out on student data regarding their participation, the work completion, their grades, any progress on their IEP goals. And again, we must not forget to get that parent input and consider that as part of this process. So as we're now transitioning to that return to school, and we are now gathering data beginning last week through this first quarter, kids have returned to school. We want to keep these thoughts in mind. As we're beginning our school year, we're gathering and reviewing new data, whether it's formal or informal. We're looking at this first quarter instruction to see how the student is doing. Are they needing extensive review in order to show us that they've learned a previously taught skill and that they still have it acquired? Are they a bit inconsistent in their performance? Are they able to show us the skills that they showed us prior to pre-COVID, whether they had fully mastered them or they had partially mastered them? And then certainly we want to consider whether or not the students are needing more. As teachers, we want to look at those data points. We want to make sure that, as we've talked about in the previous slides, carrying a lot of that data over, any ESY information, grades, IEP goals, any of the assessments, curriculum-based assessments, any sort of informal assessments that teachers may be doing. I know in BBCU, they may be having group conversations and having kids poll using the poll feature. Bigger things such as unit assessments, any screenings or inventories, and certainly their observations as teachers. And they want to think about what are the students' goals in the IEP, and how am I keeping the data? How am I keeping track of the students' progress? What assessments am I using on the students? Am I seeing gaps? And if seeing gaps, where do they lie? What needs to be addressed? Further questions to consider about this return to school time period are how is the student performing in this first week of school? What's their attendance looking like? What about any assessment data? What are they looking like compared to their peers in the classroom? Again, as an example of any classroom discussions or warm-ups or exit tickets, how are they looking compared to their peers in the classroom? What's their rate of learning when you think about the contextualization of the virtual learning model that we're providing? Is the student having any unique social emotional issues that as a teacher I'm already noting might be impacting their learning? Remembering that we have to look at the whole child and paying attention to any changes in behavior, particularly if they're a student whom we know or the data that we got from pre-COVID and from the closure doesn't match what we're seeing now for a student who's really struggling all of a sudden. So we want to pay attention to these types of things. Again, we recognize this is a great deal of information, but we want to give you an opportunity to hear it from us first as you're beginning to support your teachers with conversations around data collection and conversations in general around some of these guiding questions that we're sharing today. You can reach out, of course, to your related service providers, the clinical teams at your schools, your PSL, Office of Special Education Instruction team member, any one of us in the Procedural Support Office, Due Process and Eligibility. We're happy to help, clarify, provide you any support, answer questions to the best of our ability. So now have Debbie take you through, once you've looked at all this data and you're getting ready, what might be some suggestions on meeting as a team as you have these important discussions with each other and with parents.
Thank you, Angelina. Again, we do know that this, like Angelina said, this is a lot of information packed into a really small amount of time. So that's why it's going to be really important when we record the session that we also will take you through each individual slide in each part of the document. So this slide is going to take you through when should IEP teams meet. So it's really important to remember, and I know we've said this before, that the closure of schools due to COVID is not a normal school break, and this should be taken into consideration when considering a reasonable amount of time for recoupment. We talked to you about, and we've always talking about ESY and how much time should we wait before we determine if a student requires ESY. But typically, in those conversations, we usually say the same thing. Typically, all students may require 6 to 8 weeks to recoup skills when they've had an extended break. Students with disabilities may require more than 6 to 8 weeks to recoup skills based on the COVID closure. However, the determination of COVID recovery services is made by the IEP team after careful review of student performance and data, including pre-COVID closure, student participation and performance during COVID closure, and performance upon return to school. And Angelina gave you a lot of great tips on data sources that you can be using for each one of those timeframes. So it is recommended that schools schedule meetings after the data has been collected. We're saying 7 to 9 weeks. However, if you believe or parents are asking you to reconvene the IEP meeting, and I'll talk about the next slide, you can reconvene prior to 7 to 9 weeks. We're not saying that you can only reconvene at that time frame. It's if there is data already that you've collected after a few weeks of school and you're ready to reconvene, you think you've got enough to make a decision, you can go right ahead. We want you to really remember that. However, you can reconvene the IEP as I stated above. Parents make a request. That's really important, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that in the next slide. Or again, if you're aware that a lack of expected progress toward the annual goals and in the general education curriculum, if appropriate. So you're starting to see that. The collection of student data to inform decision making for COVID recovery services. So the data you're collecting is showing the need to go back. The results of any reevaluation conducted, information about the child shared by the parent needs to be addressed, or students' anticipated need for COVID recovery services is there, and you just need, at this point, you're not going to wait the 7 to 9 weeks. You're going to move forward with it. Okay, so the next slide. Okay, so what do you do if a parent makes a request for COVID-19 recovery services? I know that in some cases parents have either mentioned it when you were doing the IEPs for them to return to school, but when a parent makes a request to discuss COVID recovery services, this must be treated as a request for an IEP meeting. When responding to a parent request, you need to acknowledge the receipt of that communication by the parent. Then you're going to do the following. You want to communicate clearly to the parent the amount of and types of data required to address COVID recovery services during the conversation about the need for an IEP meeting. Want them to be aware of the timeframes that we're going to be looking at and the data that you're going to be needing to bring to the IEP to make some good informed decisions. Be sure to document all this information, the conversations with the parent on your meeting notification log, as we currently do with IEP meetings. After you communicate the date, the data required to make a decision to the parent, the school team may you can hold a meeting to hear the parent's request. It's okay to hold a meeting and just allow the parent to provide you with some information that they have, or you can seek parental agreement to schedule the meeting for a date in the future when the required data for decision making will be available. So let's say you're not ready to have the meeting yet. It's okay to say to the parent, we'd like to collect more data so we can really make some really good informed decisions and see if the parent is willing to wait. If the parent is willing to wait to see for us to be able to get together to see if we can collect more data, this should be clearly documented in a standalone PWN. And we added a PWN currently right now that in the document that will give you a sample of what that PWN could look like. If you don't have the data to support the conversations regarding recovery services and you decline to hold an IEP meeting, then a PWN must be issued as soon as reasonably possible. So parent can agree to not hold the IEP meeting with you and you're still going to do a PWN, but you may also refuse to, which is a refusal to hold the meeting because you really don't have the data and you really would like to wait. Therefore, in that case, you also have to give a PWN and you also have to document the reasons for the refusal. And that's really going to be, you're going to justify the reasons as the need for time to assess students' progress. And again, that sample PWN we're working on will be in the guidance document and it'll help you as you're moving through the process. So the next slide, in the document, in the recovery document, we put together 4 scenarios on how you can handle the IEP. It's like a flow chart that takes you through. If this occurs, then do this. If that occurs, then do that. So we're hoping to get that document out to you as soon as possible. As I said, we've had principals look at the document. OSCI is in Ellie's team. Tina and Denise and Judy and Mike are looking through the document, and then we will get it out as quickly as possible because we do know that parents are asking. Next slide. In the appendix, we have a Venn diagram that compares the differences between recovery services and compensatory services. And I know that some of you have gotten requests from parents that say, I want to talk about recovery services, or they maybe have said, or attorneys or advocates have said, I want to talk about compensatory services. So we have discussed in previous slides what recovery services entail, but what makes them different, what makes it different from compensatory services. So when discussing compensatory services, and you'll see this in this Venn diagram, it's a couple of bullets where what do both have, and what does recovery have, and what does compensatory have. The reason for providing compensatory services involves a denial of FAPE and/or failure to provide the student with the services and supports outlined in the IEP. The parent continues to believe that this is compensatory. Let them know recovery services are very similar. You can talk through that process with a parent using the information that we provide to you. When we are looking at recovery services, we are considering the services due to the COVID-19 pandemic, school closure, and not a denial of FAPE. Reach out to us, reach out to your PSL if you have further questions. It's going to be really helpful to have staffings during the meetings that you believe are going to be a little bit more difficult to, where you need to talk through some of the data. Ultimately, FCPS needs to make a proposal either way and clearly document it in the IEP and PWN. So it's our charge to determine whether or not that student requires recovery services or compensatory services. We just need to make sure we make the proposal, PWN it, and move forward. The parent in either case has the right to seek dispute resolution if they don't agree with the FCPS proposal or refusal. So that still is the same, and that doesn't change. So we are done with our part of the presentation. Again, remember, Angelina and I only gave you just some small, this is a highlight to the document. The VDOE document that they provided that we shared a few weeks ago was 19 pages. So we tried to culminate 19 pages into about 4 to 5 pages, I think the document is. So Dawn Azenar, do we have any questions? Oh, before Dawn or Jennifer, I just want to say Jane Strong, Dr. Strong is on with us, and she's been listening and participating in the presentation. So I just want to acknowledge that she is with us here. She's our director for our office, and she may want to chime in on some of the questions too. Okay, Jennifer.
Good morning, Debbie. Good morning, Dr. Strong. We do have some questions this morning, and I think some of them may have been answered, but I'm going to go ahead and go through them. And folks can chime in if they feel like their question has been answered. So the first one is, who is initiating the need for recovery services? Do we look at every student?
And yeah, I think we've covered that. That could either be the parent, it could be the school team, and we're looking at any student, but I'm not saying that every student will require it.
Okay. How are teams going to receive pre-COVID data and COVID school closure data when those students attended different schools last year? I think we also touched on that one.
Yes, we did.
Okay. What about students aging out this year, but parents are requesting recovery services?
So I think I've heard that question come up a couple of times. I think we're working through that. What is going to be our response and list, and take those requests to your PSL and then bring them back to our leadership team so we can talk through those. Jane, did you want to add anything to that?
Hi, everybody. So, recovery services, if they are deemed to be required, would be provided during this school year. So someone who is aging out in June, perhaps, either through graduation or age, if they qualify for a recovery, it could be done before then. I have heard parents ask in town halls about the possibility of an extension of their eligibility time, and there's been no decision to grant that. As always, we would probably consider things on a case-by-case decision. Right. In general, no, we're not looking to extend eligibility timeframes, and recovery services would be, for the most part, delivered during this academic school year.
Thank you, Jane.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question that we have is, for those families choosing to remain in online learning this year, do we have to wait until they return to in-person learning to determine recovery services?
No. So we'll be looking at recovery services for any student that you think may require it.
Okay. Another question is, shouldn't we know what recovery services look like before we even start having this conversation?
So I'll jump in, Debbie, and you add. Yes. I was going to say that I think Debbie said this, but I'll reiterate that today's presentation is a high-level overview. This was not intended to be our entire training on recovery, right, because that is still being developed. So what I hear in that question is kind of a desire to understand a little more about what does a recovery service look like. So, we'll take that feedback and hopefully be able to perhaps incorporate some of that into our training. But that's still being developed, as Debbie said. We have a draft. We're still looking at making the document and the training something that will help you with this. We understand how complex it is. And so today's slides are a high-level overview and not the final presentation or training on recovery.
Okay. One question that I think that some of our questions specifically do speak to more of that specialized training that we'll be getting for the COVID recovery, but one person had a question about students who were unable to access services and support due to the parents' inability to access technology, perhaps language or computer literacy issues among Cat B families. How do we consider that in our discussions?
So again, I think when we do the actual training, you're going to look at the data across the board, and you're going to have to make a decision as a school team whether or not that student's going to require recovery service based on a lot of different circumstances. So it's really hard to say, that you wouldn't provide it or you would provide it. It's really going to depend on that student's individual needs and depends on their IEP. It's really hard to just say it's one way for everyone. It's going to depend. And that's why the staffings are going to be really important to have for those more complicated cases. And as we do the training, we'll try to add more information about that in our trainings.
Okay. Do you have time for more questions, or are we?
I think we want to get to our next topic, and then we can always, if we have time, we can always take more questions at the end.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And I'm going to turn it over to Lori Dudridge from our Office of Due Process and Eligibility.
Good morning, everyone. Just a quick update. As all of you are probably aware, CSTARS training is now all online, including the 504 components. In your packet today, you do have the CSTARS training guide for 2020, as well as the 504 course requirements guidance document. The expectation is that all of our newly hired special education teachers will be trained this first semester, with that expectation that came out in an infogram just last week of completion by January 21st, 2020. I am hopeful that everybody is having a successful venture with this new virtual training format. I think it is very good for teachers that they don't have to get a substitute. They can kind of pace at their own need. And a reminder, there are office hours for CSTARS supports for those taking the virtual modules Mondays afternoons and Wednesday afternoons, and it's on the DPE webpage. Next up, we have hearing and vision screenings. Lots and lots of questions coming through about hearing and vision screenings and when they can be done and how they can be done. If you don't have anyone in your building that is comfortable providing that hearing and vision screening, because it was typically done by your clinician, your clinic aide, or your nurse, just know that we're hopeful that those folks will begin to phase back in as students begin to phase back into our buildings. If the team is looking at the record, we're not going to hold up eligibility for hearing and vision screenings, but we can look at those student screenings that were done in the early grades, information from the parents. We're going to take a holistic look at all the information we have as we move forward through that eligibility process. We do want to make sure that we are clearly documenting on the audit trail and the SSSE 10, that we did or didn't do those screenings. And if the team agrees that there is no need or no concern about hearing and vision screenings, document that as well. If there is a need to do them at a later time, we need to make sure that we do follow up as a team. Next up, we have present level performance pages, the PLOP. We have been reviewing IEPs, and we've noticed a trend that they are becoming more and more summative in nature about the conversation that adults are having, rather than being very child and student proposal focused. Just a reminder in regulatory language that the present level performance is where we document in objective, measurable terms to the best extent possible, test scores or other information that's directly related to the components of the IEP. So what we're proposing. It's not just a place to document what the minutes of the meeting are, and it's not for what the adults are doing. It's what decisions have we made about that student's supports and services for this upcoming IEP process. So if you are, for example, talking about a variety of options for a student, so you may be considering a general education classroom, you may be considering a general education classroom with some pull-out support, or a small group class to support a student in reading. If the team determines that a small group class is necessary to support that student, that could go on the plot. The other considerations now will become part of the prior written notice, other options considered. Now that PW added, it makes a nice clean distinction between what was proposed and what was merely considered by the team, and not merely, but taken into consideration. We go to the next slide. So again, we want a clear and concise plot page. You want to document what is discussed during the course of the meeting that's not documented elsewhere. So if you have a reading goal, we should not see reading data on the plot page. It should all be on that reading goal. If you don't have a math goal and you want to talk about math, that goes on the present level performance page. We want to make sure that when we are documenting a parent's concern, we do want to document our response. But again, we want to use our PWN to document more clearly what we've adopted and what we are proposing, to kind of clearly delineate where the present level performance page stops and the PWN begins. When we do reject something, again, PWN. But we do want to make sure that we are citing our data sources when we do that, have that discussion. It's what the student is doing or what we're doing for the student in terms of proposal, not a summative description of the conversations that happened at the table. This is a bit of a shift, and we know it's going to take some time, But once we start using that prior written notice that's embedded in the IEP, I think you will find that it gets easier to kind of make that distinction between the present level performance page being proposal and action and about the student, and the PWN in that other options considered, documenting where the rest of the proposal, the considerations are documented. So if you go to the next slide. So again, we talking about that embedded prior written notice. We've had some questions about the tiny little box that appears up in the left-hand corner. PWN will be completed at a later date. There are times when the PWN could end up being so complicated that doing it right then and there in the meeting could hold up an offer. 9 times out of 10, you're probably going to be having a PSL with you at that meeting or some other leadership member, and they would be able to access that box for you, which would allow you to put the document on hold and write the PWN at a later time. But it is only accessible by PSLs and DPE specialist administration level folks, and only should be used when the nature of the PWN actually requires that. When you're completing this internal embedded PWN, you want to be careful about your language. As always, we want complete sentences. We want to make sure that we are documenting information in every single box, because every single box is required and important. You have data to make your decision, and we want to make sure that you're using appropriate language in there. When we were doing this as a standalone letter, we were talking to you, the parent. So the parent's now sitting in front of you working on this, and it's lost the nature of letter as an embedded resource for us, a requirement for us. So you may be shifting from you to the parent in your language, or Mrs. Smith in documenting what actions or considerations the team was taking. But again, the prior written notice is a reflection of FCPS's proposal. Parents may not like what's on the PWN, but they're not disagreeing with the PWN. They're disagreeing with the proposal. So when they go to sign, that's where they would voice whatever concerns they have. They're not going to disagree with the PWN. Sometimes we do have some interesting consent decisions sent back to us by parents. If that consent decision is such that you need to very clearly document what will be implemented in response to that partial consent or just total disagreement, you would need to open a new PWN on the Documents tab if you needed to make that new, and you could use the same language from the PWN existing, but you would need to do it on the Documents tab. You can't do it in the IEP that the parent just signed. It would be in an additional PWN. Though in many cases, you may not have to do that second PWN. Our proposal is our proposal, and that's what our PWN reflects. It's, again, going to be some of those more complicated cases that may require that second prior written notice. Jane, any comments or concerns about the PLOP or PWN that I've shared?
No, I think you went over it well. The only thing, I'm glad you made the point at the end there about there are some cases where you may have additional PWNs, because that's sometimes something people aren't, aware of, or they're just not used to it because it hasn't happened to them. So that's a good point.
All right, so we will party on. Well, you might have noticed that this summer, in addition to adding that PWN to the IEP, we also updated the IEP goal progress measurement options on the goal pages. We just need everybody to be mindful that if you were to check something like data sheets, there is a requirement to figure out what that data sheet looks like. It may be a combination of things. Maybe you're not sure if frequency or interval is going to be working. So you may be selecting more than one thing in there, but really you're going to be looking back at your goals, and you should have in your goal kind of told yourself what kind of data you're looking for. If you said 3 out of 4 opportunities, he's going to do something, maybe it's frequency. If you're going to say he's going to sit still for 15 minutes, duration. But be mindful, please. You will not be able to put this document on hold if you have not filled in the what is it on the other end of some of your options here. You also might notice that we took out things like classwork and homework. Well, everybody was choosing those, and they sometimes really didn't go with what they were. It was kind of like a fishing expedition. We were checking everything, so we just broke that down to work samples. So again, if you have any questions about this, let us know, but we are fast approaching interims, and we want to make sure on the next slide here that we are providing our progress reports as we are supposed to. So looking back to third quarter, it's going to take some juggling, I'm sure, but you need to look back to third quarter because that was the last time we sent out we sent out progress reports. And if anyone had a 1 or a 2, we need to make sure that those interims go out. Earlier you talked about data and how to kind of pull it from those synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities. In your data comments, encourage your staff to break down what the data is. So if they were in an asynchronous learning opportunity, where did we pull that data? Was it from parent report? Was it at a completed assignment that was turned in, or post-activity assessment? So they did some asynchronous learning and the next morning you had a quiz or you had asked questions. We just need you really to be focusing on those comment sections and what your teachers are writing in there, because parents are going to want to know, where did this data come from? And how do you know that that's really reflective of my students' progress? And that would be something that you're going to be looking at very carefully to think about those recruitment opportunities for students that Debbie was talking about earlier. And again, those progress reports will need to go out the same time that report cards are sent. And then finally, on my next slide, just a gentle reminder, friends, that 504 initial qualification requires a full local screening team. Yes, some of our SBC school-based coordinators for 504 are trained in CSTARS, but they are not the experts. The local screening team needs to sit initial qualification. So if you as a team said during a local screening, let's look at 504, then that team needs to be present for the initial qualification discussion. Any questions or concerns about that, you certainly can reach out to Due Process and Eligibility or Kathy Murphy, who's our 504 specialist. Thanks everybody for your time today. Hopefully you learned a few things, and I will catch up with you guys if you have any questions or concerns later.
Thank you, Lori. Dawn or Jennifer, are there any questions for Lori?
Yes, we do have a few questions. The first one is, and I know Lori kind of addressed this, but there was a request, could default case managers please have access to the button that defers completion of the PWN?
I certainly will bring that to the team to consider, but right now they do not.
Perfect. The next question, again, revolving around PWNs. Are we completing the PWNs prior to the meeting, sending it home in draft format?
No.
Or
No,
are we completing?
No. No, you have to have the discussion to develop a PWN.
Yes, and that leads into the next part of that question. Or are we completing them during the meeting or after the meeting?
Well, you certainly could have, and just be careful, we don't want 50 computers open, but you certainly could have someone who is making some notes for the prior written notice during the discussion, just like we do for the plop oftentimes, but it cannot be done ahead of time. That would be predetermination, and that would be bad. Iep jail for all of us.
Thank you so much. And the last two questions, real quick, if we have time, revolve around progress reports.
Okay, if we can just, yeah, go ahead, Dawn.
Okay, the first one is the teacher has a student who has an entirely new IEP since March or April. So how are we going to do an interim progress report this quarter based on third quarter data?
Well, remember, you're going to be looking at third quarter goals. If you wrote a new IEP, you would compare where they had ones or twos because they should be still reflected in the IEP. So if there was a goal in third quarter where they got a 1, which is not introduced, or a 2 introduced but no progress, I would think that those goals would still be reflected in the IEP.
Perfect. And the last one is, can progress reports be sent home via email, or do we still need to mail them?
I will defer that to Jane, but I would think in this day we could email them because we are emailing other things if we have parent permission. But I would just remind staff that they have to be printed and filed. We do that every quarter. We don't save it all up to the end of the year. They do need to be filed. We need to make sure that we are updating our special services files. We are back in buildings now as educators, and the expectation is that all of that backlog is making it into the special services file.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. I'm going to turn this over to Ellie for the OSCI updates. So Ellie, take it away.
All right. And I'm going to start the updates by posting a poll. I realized we did not ask who was in the room today. And typically when we're in person, of course, we can look around and get a feel for who's in the room. But if you'll go ahead and let us know who's with us today. I know that we have some administrators, some department chairs, central office. So let us know who's in the room. We are thrilled to have you all here, and yes, we are entering the final countdown. We've entered the last, entering the last half hour of the meeting. I did want to share some updates with you, and then after I show my slides, I am going to pull up the notes document. The guided notes for today's meeting, you may have seen in other trainings that you've been to. We're using it in a way to share information with you that is not presented necessarily during the meeting. So like Janelle referenced a few documents in a training that you would want to take time after the meeting to look at those. And you'll notice as I go through my section that I've done the same thing, that there's a number of that I'm not going to get to, but I wanted to make sure you have access to those. So, all right, looking at who's in the room. Of the 117 people who are in the room, we do have the majority, not surprisingly, are our department chairs. And we've got some special ed administrators, but we also have some school administrators who are not special ed. So we're thrilled to have everybody. A few extra staff who are not our school-based staff who I didn't include in the options below. And then, of course, our central office. So thrilled to have you all. Thanks for doing that. Just wanted to really get a good feel for who was here. And switching over to our first slide. The first slide is just a reminder. This is an expectation that was put together for this school year that was shared in a variety of places as we were starting up the year. But now that we are entering the third week of school, a reminder that your staff should be checking in with their students. For Cat A, we are connecting in or checking in with the actual students, except for, of course, if it's more appropriate to talk to the parent. And then for Cat B, in the majority of cases, it's going to be more appropriate to talk to the parents. And during that conversation, you could talk about how they can best support the child. But these are check-ins to see how things are going. What's sort of funny is I didn't realize, I'm the one who has closed captioning on my computer going, that you all could hear what I was saying or see in the closed captioning even when I was muted. So earlier in the meeting, you actually might have heard me telling my son or asking my son if he had it on his radar to go for his check-in. So his teacher during this meeting was doing her check-in with my son. So I really appreciate all the work that your teachers are doing. And I know this is that one extra level of expectation along with all of the hard work and prep that's going into teaching, but it does make sure that our teachers are connecting with students to hear how things are going. Are they struggling? Because some of our students might be struggling, but it's a little hidden because we're not seeing them face to face or as we walk around the classroom. We also know that some of our students are actually doing a lot better right now with education being virtual. We have some students who are excelling now who maybe didn't do it in person. So as we talk about the school year, and you all know this, but we talked to the principals about this last week, and we mentioned we would mention it here today, that some of our students with disabilities might need a little bit of extra training and more explicit training on how to use the tools that we use in class. So if you're using Blackboard Collaborate or expecting your student to go into Google Classroom to do an activity on Google Slides, just a reminder for you all and then for your colleagues that some of our students might need that extra time showing them how to do that. So if you haven't already considered it, or if as they talk to students, they hear that a student is struggling, or they've noticed a student hasn't turned in any assignments in Google Classroom, it might be because that little extra support is required. All right, and I'm going to pause here and turn on or introduce Judy Dupre. She is joining us today, and she is the coordinator for Related Services, and she wanted to talk about Related Services, some scheduling for them. Judy, are you there?
I am. Thank you, Ellie. Hi, everybody. I'm Judy Dupre, as Ellie said. I'm the new coordinator for Related Services, and I just want to thank all of you for supporting our folks as they are trying to navigate the scheduling. I know that has been, it's usually a difficult task, even when we're in person, and our virtual start has made it even more complicated. So just as we're moving ahead with, feeling more comfortable in our scheduling and our classes and rotations, if you can just remind your teachers to have as much flexibility as they can with our related service providers. Unfortunately, we're having to push in during times that might be, family choice, or we might be doing a lunch bunch over that lunch hour break time. We might be pushing into a classroom, asking for a breakout, or maybe pulling kids out of a classroom in order to do some small group work. So there's no exact science around this for our related service providers. So if you guys can just, again, be as flexible as you can and encourage your teachers to be as flexible as you can as we try and work out the scheduling and meet the IEP hours and make some progress on these goals. So if you have any specific questions about related services, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Judy. And I typed her name in the chat window because when we were saying it, it wasn't coming up correctly. All right. The next one that we mentioned to administrators, but once again, we told them we would mention it to you all, though I think your teachers are doing this as well, is knowing that being in the virtual environment, we still need to, of course, work on our students' social skills. And then there might even be areas where students are struggling that you wouldn't see in the classroom. You might have a student who in the classroom is is willing to participate, well, as much as appropriate for the age level, right? But some students during the virtual environment, they might not be comfortable turning their camera on, or they might not be comfortable speaking out loud in the virtual environment. And so that's just another thing that we wanted to put that reminder in to be looking out for, because some of those students might an alternative way to participate in class. So just something, like I said, we've seen some students who struggle with social skills in the classroom who are excelling right now virtually. We've also seen some students who do better in person who now maybe they aren't willing to participate because of the camera or the turning on their microphone. And then the fourth bullet I actually already talked about when we were talking about data. And it was interesting when you all were doing your successes. I forget what the Padlet was for the data, but something about, I think, successes and barriers. And in the barrier section, quite a few of you put that parents are doing the work for students online. And I was meeting with a school, I don't know if they're here right now, last week, and they shared that with me, that they've seen that actually at all levels, and also with Category A and Category B, where parents might be providing the answers to the student, and that becomes apparent. It might also be where the teacher's giving the student wait time or think time to allow for the processing, and the parents, they're prompting the student, which, as we know, for students, that prompting actually is messing them up. You know, if you're not giving them that wait time, that think time, every time you ask the question again, they start over thinking about the answer. So these are just conversations that we might need to be having with parents. And then I also was at a meeting last week where it came up that in some cases, parents are coming into the classroom with their students into the classroom and trying to have a conversation with the teacher. And so just a reminder, if these things are coming up, you know, have those conversations with the parents. But if you need support with those conversations outside of what's going on at your school, like this might be something that comes up at back to school night, just let us know and we can see how we can support you. All righty. There's also for our students who are in Category B, where for some of the students they do need some prompting, but we want to fade the prompting so they're not so dependent on it. There are also some really good videos regarding that on the Special Ed Hub. And that takes me to the Hub. I'm going to come over here and I'm going to pull up the Special Ed Hub. Whoops, I thought it was going to be right there and it's not. The Special Ed Hub has a lot of different links into it. And you saw that when we went there during the data section of the meeting. I'm scrolling down, hopefully not making you feel dizzy, in my notes. Once again, these guided notes are for you to be taking notes during the meeting, but also know that we have information here that wasn't necessarily shared. The Special Ed Virtual Hub that we showed earlier is a site that we are using to really put the information out there for you all that you all need and your staff need for the start of the school year. So if you have not spent time there, we encourage you to go and explore. We do have a link that's always available or typically available at the start of the year. That's the DSS school-based support contacts. And that's how you can know, if you don't already know, who's supporting you. If you're wondering who your ABA coach is, who your high incident support person is, who your psychologist is, who your PSL is, all of that information is available on that database. One of the big ones I want to make sure I point out, and I believe most of you all have seen this already, but we do have a document on the Hub, and the link is here on your notes, to the research-based program use guide. Last year when we initially shut down in March, to be honest, our company, just like we weren't ready for it, the companies that we work with, they weren't ready for it either. And so we had to work with them throughout the spring regarding copyright. What can we access virtually and what can we not access virtually? And so with that, a lot of companies have changed their permissions from what was allowed last spring to now what is allowed. And so you want to make sure you check this link and it will let you know what is allowed, what is not allowed. It also includes whether or not your lesson using the program can be recorded. The majority of our programs allow you to record the lesson, but McGraw-Hill products do not allow for you to record the lesson. So that guidance is there. While this year is very different than the start of every other year, something else that we're continuing to do is helping you and your teams match programs. So if a student is last year was using a program and you want to use one for them this year, or if it's a new program, we do have some data digging tools that we use to help make sure we're matching the right program. For example, we had a lot of students who used Lexia during the shutdown. Well, Lexia, while it was available during the shutdown
And the company gave us 1 million licenses. Literally, they gave us 999,999 licenses last year. And so many of our students were accessing it, general ed and special ed. Coming back this year, we are working with your teams to make that match. Now that we are providing synchronous instruction on a daily basis, Lexia is not going to be the most appropriate program for some students. And the same goes with our other programs. So we are going to be helping you make the match. If we can't have the conversation now about program matching, because we know how insane it is in the schools right now, it is possible that we might give you access to a program that you previously had access to, and then ask to meet with you, you being the teacher here, not you, the department chair, but you, the teacher, will ask to meet with the teacher maybe in October or a little bit later to then make sure that it is the appropriate program. What we don't want to happen is not find out until June that the program was not appropriate for the student. So with any instruction, we are always doing our formative assessments and making sure the student is making progress and it's still the appropriate a program in this case for the student. So that is part of the process for this year, and your team members will work through with you. We are hosting office hours, a couple of the different offices, the Cat A and, whoops, down here where it says Adapted Curriculum Cat A, that of course should say Cat B. Now that I'm over both programs, I sometimes mix them up, but we do have office hours. Of course, our teams exist to support you and your teams. So we can help you outside of office hours, no problem. But for some staff, it helps for them to know that they can come on Monday afternoon from 2 to 3 and talk to somebody from, let's say, the general curriculum team. So just know that those are there. I'm going to let you, at this point, I'm keeping an eye on the clock. I'm going to let you all take time outside of the meeting or while I continue to talk so that you can see the additional information that's on here. There is, I will point out, in the PD section of the Special Ed Hub, so the professional development section, there are a lot of links to recorded trainings. So if you're not sure where to go to find your trainings, there's a lot of links available for you in the hub, and the link is available right here. And then in the end, I've just added some links to parent trainings. We have some ABA parent training, so that's put together by the ABA program. Incredible trainings for your Cat B program and even some of the Cat A students, but that's a great place to send parents. And then our behavior intervention support services team, they're doing a series of trainings with the Parent Resource Center. They're going to be live, and you can see the dates here. All right, and that brings us to the next part of our agenda.
So Ellie, I'm wondering, let's see if we've got any questions from Dawn or Jennifer for you, and then we'll see how much time we have left at the end for the last activity if we have time.
Perfect.
Okay, I can go ahead and go, Dawn. One of the teachers asked, can the check-ins with students be during advisory and still count towards that check-in?
So thank you. We have asked, or the guidance is that it occurs outside of the service hours. So that is the current guidance. What we are going to be doing is taking feedback. And when we spoke about this to the school board, some of you may have heard the school board, some school board members were asking for this check-in to be on a weekly basis, you know, adjusting it. So I do want to let you know that for now we are saying outside of your service hours, but we might be updating that guidance as we get down the road. But do know that is a minimum right now, the 2 times every 2 weeks. If you do have a student who requires that check-in on a weekly basis, we're expecting the teacher to use their professional, knowledge to do it more often. And there might even be some students that you've actually been checking in with on a daily basis.
So yes, if the student does not have the service hours, if the advisory section of your schedule is not a part of their service hours, that can count as long as it's that individual connection. So if I'm connecting with Johnny, it cannot be in a room where I have other students, because this needs to be the time for Johnny and me to talk without other students hearing what we're talking about.
Okay,
Perfect.
thank you. Thank you, Ellie. Another question is evidence-based program training available for paraprofessionals and teachers at this time for all programs available during distance learning?
Oh my, that's a powerful question. So many of our programs have asynchronous training options. And if you go to the Special Ed Hub, to the professional development page, you will see for both Cat A programs and Cat B programs, there are asynchronous options. However, there are some programs that we cannot do asynchronously. They have to be done synchronously or live. We are just now putting out the information for the live trainings. With the being back virtually and there not being subs available if you're pulled out of the classroom for one day, and also knowing how hard it is for a sub to make up time for the one day that you are out of the class, we right now are looking to find times that we can provide training that takes more than 3 hours. So we're working right now on scheduling the trainings that have to be live and that have to be or can be 3 hours. Those we're going to offer multiple times each week, Monday afternoon being one, or not each week, but the week that we're offering it, it will be offered Monday afternoon, as well as at evening or after school another day that week. However, we have a couple trainings that, according to the company, it must be 5 or 6 hours live on the same day, and we're trying to figure out options for when we can offer those. So some of the trainings that you all are used to us offering on a monthly basis during the school day, we're not able to do right now. So we are looking at, for example, on October 12th, the teacher workday, offering some of those trainings. So unfortunately, the answer, we had the good news, there's a lot available asynchronously, and yes, paraprofessionals can participate, and then we're working to schedule the ones that have to be live and longer than the 3 hours. So that information's coming.
Okay, thank you, Ellie. We have one more question. Do we have time to answer?
Yeah.
Okay. The next question has to do with the Brigance training that's online for the CIBS2. If so, is the in-person component being checked by someone from adapted curriculum no longer required?
And that, oh good, Jugnu is still in the room. Jugnu.
Yeah, hi everyone. So the in-person component is actually included in that training, so which is on the Blackboard.
Good, so that's been adjusted, because whoever asked that, you're right. For the Brigance training, we always used to have an in-person component. And so thank you.
Yeah, and that is it on the OSEI instructional updates column.
Thank you. Thank you, Dawn.
Dawn, are there any other questions, Dawn or Jen, that we haven't gotten to yet?
There are some miscellaneous questions at the end. We do have some questions that are still in the columns that we created. Dawn, do you want to go ahead and talk about the other questions that came up?
Yes, I was thinking the same thing. I think there's 2 other questions we definitely want to address, as I imagine it's across the county. The first one is students, particularly Cat B, are unable to attend full synchronous sessions or asynchronous sessions. How are we to take attendance for these students, particularly with the county's focus on accurate attendance at this time?
So that question, I'm going to answer it not a little more than just the attendance piece. For our students who are receiving Cat B services, the team, you all can talk about the amount of time that is appropriate for those students to be attending. So at the secondary level, typical classes are 80 minutes. it is okay for our students who are receiving Cat B services for you all to say that 80 minutes is too much. The student's not available for learning for that long. And it gets to a point, you know, with our students where if you ask them to stay on, where it actually isn't helpful at all. If anything, you're losing and you're getting the behaviors, you know. So it is okay for our Cat B students, as appropriate for the student, that they only attend for like 40 minutes. And then depending on the student's or the staff schedule and their ability to be flexible, some schools have even broken up the time that the student is attending into chunks of time, if that's what the student requires. But with Cat B, you are given some flexibility. And when you go to the Special Ed Hub, one of the sample schedules shows what it might look like where your students at the secondary level are only coming for 40 minutes at a chunk of time. So you can be flexible on that. Regarding the attendance, that's something we're going to have to follow up on, because I know that there's a big emphasis on attendance, but that's not an area that I have really been a part of. So I will follow up with the office that works on attendance to talk to them about that, because I'm guessing, judging by your question, they're looking at students attending for the entire class period, and we want to make sure students are getting the credit that they require. But for Cat B, we have that little bit of flexibility.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And the next topic involves the KTEA3. The question is, are schools working hard to catch up with evaluations for eligibility? Are there dates for any upcoming KTA3 trainings? Can something be done to increase the number of testers in our building or help us?
Yeah, so that is another item that we are working on right now, those trainings. Let me just say, we're working on it and we hear the need, and it's helpful for me to hear you, whoever put that on there, and I will go back to the team. What's hard is we had a huge group of teachers who were in the middle of getting trained last year that come March, they couldn't finish and get trained. And so we're working on getting that group of staff up and running, up and trained so that they can administer the assessment. And then while we're doing that, it's also the second tier is how do we get new teachers trained, knowing that we have to train everything virtually and all that goes into those important trainings. That's something that we're continuing to work through. But I will connect with Tracy Puckett, who is helping to lead that effort, and I will make sure that the trainings are posted as they're available. But yes, we hear the need, and like I said, I appreciate you asking to confirm the need out there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Do we have time for one more other question?
Yes, we do. Yep, go ahead.
Perfect. So when we propose teachers meet individually with their caseload students, is this during contract hours or after contract hours?
Good question. Contract hours. So we're hoping as much of this can be done, of course, on contract hours. We know that teachers are putting in so many hours beyond their contract time, but it is the expectation that this is able to be done during contract time. We know there might be situations where maybe a caregiver is not available during contract time, and that would be something to talk to your administrators about. But otherwise, we're trying to get it done during contract time. A lot of people, it's going to be on these Mondays where we're doing these conversations with students.
Perfect. And then one more question regarding KTEA that should be a quick answer is, can teachers from other schools or programs test students in the KTEA?
Yes, they can. As long as the person is a Fairfax County employee who's been certified, they can certainly test the students. And we are encouraging, I love that you asked this question, we are encouraging schools to work with each other. So maybe within a pyramid, seeing how you can work with each other. And I know PSLs have been very, very helpful in making those connections between schools, because some schools have more students to test than others, and they may not have as many students or many testers. So we are finding ways to make that work. So yes, that can happen.
Okay, perfect. And then I saw Heather put something in the chat box about if somebody was certified in another county but is new to FCPS, do they have to be certified again by FCPS?
And so, Heather, I'm going to ask for you to reach out to either me or Tracy Puckett specifically to ask her that question, because I do not know the answer, and Tracy is the one that I would be asking. So I just put her name in the chat window.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So those were our questions from the other column. We do have some unfinished questions from the other columns, but I will defer to our leadership as to how to help us move forward.
Yeah, so we've only got about 5 more minutes left. So if you want to, so I think we're not going to be able to do Ellie our last activity because we've kind of running out of time. So if there's a question you want us to take, maybe we could just finish up with one more question so we can honor everybody's time and get and be done right by 11:30.
Perfect. That sounds great. Jennifer, I didn't know if there was one in particular that we wanted to look at. We can go back to the online course.
Yeah, I was just looking through the questions. There are a couple of questions about the online courses that may have to be addressed directly with, I think, Nicole.
Nicole, yeah, we can take those questions back to Nicole and then get them back out.
Okay.
That's not a problem.
We have a couple questions about the Naviance and why it's not in C-STARS, but again, I don't know if that's a short answer.
Let's see if Janelle is still here. Let me just check to see if she's still here. Yeah, I don't see her. She's not here to answer that, so we could just get those questions to Janelle, and then Janelle can get those back out.
Perfect.
Okay. I'm sorry, Dawn, go ahead.
That's okay. I was just thinking there's one that would be a great question for the whole team. Is there a copy of the IEP binder example on the special ed site? And that revolves around data collection.
There is not, but there will be, thanks to you asking that question.
That's a good one. Yeah, that's a great one to have.
Sorry, the table of contents for the Cat B data binders is posted on the Applied Behavior Analysis website as well.
Yay, thanks, Courtney.
No problem.
Yeah.
Well, then we could save the rest of the questions for another time, as they look like they're going to require a little more information gathering.
Okay, thank you so much, Jennifer and Dawn. So I'm just going to thank everybody. We've got about 3 minutes left. I wanted to thank all the presenters, Ellie and everyone for navigating through the process, and for Ellie for putting up the notes for us. If you have any additional questions or concerns, please reach out to any one of us. We'll be happy to help. Again, thank you so much for everything you're doing and for a great start to school. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk soon. Thank you, everyone.